Saint George and the Dragon. Long ago, when the knights lived in the land, there was one knight whose name was Sir George. He was not only braver than all the rest, but he was so noble, kind, and good that the people came to call him Saint George. No robbers ever dared to trouble the people who lived near his castle, and all the wild animals were driven away so the little children could play even in the woods without being afraid. One day Saint George rode throughout the country. Everywhere he saw the men busy at their work in the fields, the women singing at work in their homes, and the little children shouting at their play. "These people are all safe and happy. They need me no more," said Saint George. "But somewhere perhaps there is trouble and fear. There may be some place where little children cannot play in safety. Some woman may not have been carried away from her home. Perhaps there are even dragons left to be slain. Tomorrow I shall ride away and never stop until I find work that only a knight can do." Early the next morning St. George put on his helmet and all his shining armor, and fastened his sword at his side. Then he mounted his great white horse and rode out from his castle gate. Down the steep, rough road he went, sitting straight and tall, and looking brave and strong as a knight should look. On through the little village at the foot of the hill, and out across the country he rode. Everywhere he saw rich fields filled with waving grain. Everywhere there was peace and plenty. He rode on until at last he came into a part of the country he had never seen before. He noticed that there were no men working in the fields. The houses he passed stood silent and empty. The grass along the roadside was scorched as if a fire had passed over it. A field of wheat was all trampled and burned. St. George drew up his horse and looked carefully about him. Everywhere there was silence and desolation. "What dreadful thing has driven all the people from their homes? I must find out and give them help if I can," he said. But there was no one to ask, so St. George rode forward until at last, far in the distance, he saw the walls of a city. "There I shall surely find someone who can tell me the cause of all of this," he said, so he rode more swiftly towards the city. Just then the great gate opened, and St. George saw crowds of people standing inside the wall. Some of them were weeping, and all of them seemed afraid. As St. George watched, he saw a beautiful maiden dressed in white, with a girdle of scarlet about her waist, pass through the gate alone. The gate clanged shut, and the maiden walked along the road, weeping bitterly. She did not see St. George, who was riding quickly towards her. "Maiden, why do you weep?" he asked as he reached her side. She looked up at St. George sitting there on his horse, so straight and tall and beautiful. "Oh, Sir Knight," she cried, "ride quickly from this place. You know not the danger you are in." "Danger!" said St. George. "Do you think a knight would flee from danger? Besides, you, a fair girl, are here alone. Think you a knight would leave you or any woman so? Tell me your trouble, that I may help you." "No, no," she cried. "Hasten away. You would only lose your life. There is a terrible dragon near. He may come at any moment. One breath would destroy you if he found you here. Go, go quickly." "Tell me more of this," said St. George sternly. "Why are you here alone to meet this dragon? Are there no men left in your city?" "Oh," said the maiden, "my father the king is old and feeble. He has only me to help him take care of his people. This terrible dragon has driven them from their homes, carried away their cattle, and ruined their crops. They have all come within the walls of this city for safety. For weeks now the dragon has come to the very gates of this city. We have been forced to give him 2 sheep each day for his breakfast. Yesterday there were no sheep left to give, so he said that unless a young maiden were given him today, he would break down the walls and destroy the city. The people cried to my father to save them, but he could do nothing. I am going to give myself to the dragon. Perhaps if he has me, the princess, he may spare our people." "Lead the way, brave princess. Show me where this monster may be found." When the princess saw St. George's flashing eyes and great strong arm as he drew forth his sword, she felt afraid no more. Turning, she led the way to the shining pool. "There's where he stays," she whispered. "See, the water moves. He is waking." St. George saw the head of the dragon lifted from the pool. Fold on fold he rose from the water. When he saw St. George, he gave a roar of rage and plunged towards him. The smoke and flames flew from his nostrils, and he opened his great jaws as if to swallow both the knight and his horse. St. George shouted, and waving his sword above his head, rode at the dragon. Quick and hard came the blows from St. George's sword. It was a terrible battle. At last the dragon was wounded. He roared with pain and plunged at St. George, opening his great mouth close to the brave knight's head. St. George looked carefully, then struck with all his strength straight down through the dragon's throat. The creature fell at the horse's feet, dead. Then St. George shouted for joy at his victory. He called to the princess. She came and stood beside him. "Give me the girdle from your waist, O princess," said St. George. The princess gave her girdle, and St. George bound it around the dragon's neck. They pulled the dragon after them by that little silken ribbon back to the city, for all the people to see the dragon would never harm them again. When they saw St. George bringing the princess back in safety, and knew that the dragon was slain, they threw open the gates of the city and sent up great shouts of joy. The king heard them and came out from his palace to see why the people were shouting. When he saw his daughter safe, he was the happiest of them all. "Oh, brave knight," he said, "I am old and weak. Stay here and help me guard my people from harm." "I'll stay as long as you ever have need of me," St. George answered. So he lived in the palace and helped the old king take care of his people, and when the old king died, St. George was made king in his stead. The people felt happy and safe so long as they had such a brave and good man for their king. The end.